The news broke not with a bang, but with 1,000 confused whispers online. It started on forums, in small Reddit threads and private Facebook groups dedicated to debt management, places where people went to share their misery and find solace in shared struggle. Is anyone else seeing this? My Fed trust balance is 0. I'm afraid to even be happy yet. Woke up this morning and my car loan is gone. Vanished. This has to be a mistake, right? They're gonna fix it and it'll be back tomorrow, right? My mom has been fighting foreclosure for a year. She just got a letter from the bank. It says her mortgage is paid off. We're all crying. We've been crying for an hour. At first, the posts were dismissed as scams or wishful thinking. But they kept coming, from all over the country, from all walks of life. The whispers grew into a murmur, then a roar. Local news stations began picking up the story, running segments about baffled citizens and tight-lipped financial institutions that would only release terse statements about investigating system irregularities. Elias Vance saw one of those segments. He sat on his sofa, Sarah's hand gripping his so tightly her knuckles were white, Lily nestled between them, watching the TV with wide eyes. They watched a young woman, a teacher, she said, named Sarah Jenkins, speak to a reporter, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and hope. She described logging into her student loan account and seeing a 0 balance. It felt, she said, her eyes shining, like I could finally breathe. Elias knew that feeling. He had been breathing it all day. The air had never tasted so sweet. The weight that had lived in his chest for years was simply gone. He found the Reddit thread she had mentioned, a quickly growing community calling itself the Zeroed. He spent hours reading the stories, each one a mirror of his own. A family crushed by medical debt after their child got sick. A young couple who couldn't afford to get married because of their student loans. An elderly man who had co-signed for his grandson's failed business and lost his retirement. And Mr. Lee Chen, the owner of a beloved little dumpling shop in their own city, Providence Falls. Mr. Chen posted a picture of a letter from his bank. His business loan, the one that had kept him awake with worry for 3 years, was gone. I can finally buy new equipment, he wrote. I can finally give my wife the vacation I promised her 10 years ago. Today, dumplings are free for everyone. They were all different, yet they were all the same. They were good people trapped in a broken system, people who had been told they were failures, delinquents, numbers on a spreadsheet, and something, or someone, had set them free. That evening, a small crowd began to gather spontaneously in the main square of Providence Falls, drawn together by a shared, unbelievable miracle. Elias and Sarah went, feeling a pull they couldn't explain. They saw Sarah Jenkins there, the teacher from the news, talking with a tearful Mr. Chen and his beaming wife. They were strangers, but they embraced like old friends. They shared their stories, their voices filled with wonder and a fragile, burgeoning hope. They didn't know how it had happened. They didn't know why. Some called it a glitch, a benevolent hack, a fluke. But Elias, standing there with his wife's hand in his, watching Lily chase fireflies on the grass, looking up at the star-filled sky, knew what it was. It was an answer to a prayer he thought had gone unheard. It was the sound of a drowning man finally breathing. It was a pardon, and across the world, in sterile offices and high-tech server rooms, the men and women who ran the world of numbers were scrambling, terrified, for a logical explanation. But they would not find one. Because the event that was becoming known as the Great Zeroing was not an act of man. It was an act of grace. It was a divine intervention written not in fire across the sky, but in glowing green digits on a balance sheet. It was God's quiet, definitive statement, a whisper that shook the foundations of the world. The debt is paid. Sarah Jenkins lived her life by the numbers. $182,000 in student loan debt, a 480-square-foot apartment, a 32-minute commute on 2 different bus lines to her job as a third-grade teacher at a cash-strapped public school, 27 students in her overcrowded classroom, and on a good week, 4 hours of sleep a night. She was 26, but she felt ancient. The bright-eyed idealism she'd carried out of college had been eroded by the relentless drip, drip, drip of financial reality. She loved her job, loved the chaotic, brilliant energy of her kids, but every paycheck felt like a joke. After taxes, rent, and the minimum payment on her loans, a payment that barely touched the principal and felt more like a tribute to a vengeful God, she was left with just enough for instant noodles and bus fare. Her debt was a constant companion, a gray shadow that followed her everywhere. It was the reason she couldn't afford to fix the rattling noise in her car, the reason she said no to dinner with friends, the reason she hadn't been on a real date in 2 years. Her life wasn't her own. It belonged to the Department of Education and its loan servicer, a faceless entity called Fed Trust. This morning, as she deleted the usual deluge of junk mail from her inbox, one email caught her eye. The subject line was innocuous. An update regarding your Fed Trust account. Probably another notice that her interest rate was ticking up a fraction of a percent. She sighed and clicked it open, ready for the familiar spike of anxiety. But the email was different. It wasn't a notice. It was a statement. Account holder, Sarah M. Jenkins Loan. ID 884L 2019. Original principal, $182,000. Interest accrued, $21,455.90. Payments received, $8,750 month. Current balance, 0.0 status. Paid in full. Sarah stared at the screen. She read it again. And again. Paid in full? It was impossible. A mistake. A cruel, elaborate phishing scam designed to harvest her login details. She checked the sender's address. It was legitimate. With trembling hands, she navigated to the official Fed Trust website and logged in, her heart pounding against her ribs. She entered her password, answered her security question. What was the name of your first pet? A hamster named Chairman Meow, and braced herself for the sight of the familiar, horrifying 6-digit number. Her dashboard loaded, and there it was, in the same bright, optimistic green as the logo. Your loan has been paid in full. Congratulations. Balance. Domur. She felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. It couldn't be real. Maybe a wealthy, anonymous benefactor? A lottery she didn't know she'd won. She frantically clicked through every tab. Payment history, loan details, documents. Everything was normal. A perfect record of her long struggle except for the final impossible fact. Her debt, the shadow that had defined her entire adult life, was gone. She sank back in her chair, her breath catching in her throat. She wasn't weeping with joy. She was too shocked for that. A strange, unfamiliar feeling began to bubble up inside her. A feeling she hadn't allowed herself to experience in years. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It was something lighter, more fragile. It was possibility. What would a life without debt even look like? The question was so vast she could barely comprehend it. She could buy fresh vegetables instead of canned. She could see a dentist about the tooth that had been aching for 6 months. She could afford a new set of books for her classroom, books with bright covers and intact pages. She could maybe, just maybe, start to dream again. A small house, perhaps. a trip to see the ocean, which she had only ever seen in pictures. The freedom to simply exist without a number hanging over her head. She sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, at the two beautiful, perfect zeros that had just rewritten her future, wondering if she was still asleep. Deep in the refrigerated heart of Praxis Data Solutions server farm, alarms were screaming. Not audible alarms, but silent, frantic flags popping up across the monitoring dashboards of the IT department. The air, normally just cold, felt charged with panic. "I've got another one," a young analyst named Kevin mumbled, his eyes wide behind his thick glasses. Account number 91C Chen, LI, small business loan, 68,000, wiped, balance 0. Run a diagnostic, his supervisor, a grim-faced woman named Brenda, commanded from across the room. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the rising tension. "Check the transaction logs. I want to know who authorized it, what terminal it came from, and what time it was executed. Now!" Kevin's fingers flew across the keyboard. "That's the thing, Bren. There's no authorization. No transaction. The logs are clean. It's not that the debt was paid or forgiven by one of our agents. It's just gone. The final balance field in the database was overwritten, replaced with 0. "That's impossible," Brenda snapped, marching over to his station. "Our database has triple redundancy and military-grade encryption. Nothing gets overwritten without leaving a footprint the size of a T-Rex." "Well, something did," another analyst called out from across the room. "I'm seeing it across multiple servers. B. Vance, Elias, mortgage and medical, zeroed. 42D Jenkins, Sarah. Student loans, serviced by Fed Trust, but we have the data mirror, zeroed. They're all different loan types, different servicers, different risk profiles. There's no pattern." For the next hour, the department descended into controlled chaos. They were the best in the business, the digital guardians of the nation's financial ledger. They treated their servers like a holy sanctum. A breach of this magnitude was not just a technical problem. It was a violation, a sacrilege. They searched for any sign of a hack, a brute force attack, a malware injection, a social engineering breach. They found nothing. The firewalls were untouched. The security protocols were holding firm. It was as if a ghost had slipped through their defenses, moved through their most secure data vaults, and simply changed the numbers with an invisible pen. The most terrifying part was the elegance of it. It wasn't a messy deletion that would corrupt the database. It was a perfect surgical alteration. The account histories were intact, every charge and interest payment perfectly recorded. Only the final crushing sum had been changed to 0, with the status flipped to paid in full. It was clean. It was untraceable. It was impossible. By noon, Brenda had escalated the issue to the CEO. By 1 p.m., the FBI's cybercrime division was on the line. By 3 p.m., they realized the scope of the problem. It wasn't just Praxis. It was happening everywhere. Fed Trust was reporting the same anomalies. Major banks, credit unions, auto lenders, they were all seeing it. Sporadic, seemingly random accounts, suddenly and inexplicably wiped clean. "It's not a hack," Kevin said, leaning back in his chair, his face pale. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "A hacker steals things, or they crash the system for bragging rights. They want money or chaos. This is something else. This isn't theft. It feels like a pardon." Brenda stared at her screen, at a list of hundreds, now thousands, of accounts that had been touched by the phantom. There was no rhyme or reason she could see. A teacher in Providence Falls, a farmer in Iowa whose farm had been in the family for generations, a single mother in Miami working 2 jobs, a restaurant owner in San Francisco. The only thing they had in common was that they were drowning. "Keep digging," she ordered, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. There has to be a logical explanation. But as she looked at the growing list of zeros, a cold, unsettling thought crept into her mind, a thought so illogical it felt like heresy in her world of code and data. What if there wasn't? Miles away, in a sleek glass and steel tower that scraped the clouds, Marcus Thorne was orchestrating his own symphony of silence. His office was a minimalist's dream, a carefully curated space designed to eliminate all distraction. A black desk, a high-tech chair, and a panoramic window that overlooked the city's glittering grid of lights. The only sound was the soft, near-inaudible hum of his workstation, a machine he affectionately called the Harbinger. The Harbinger was the crown jewel of Praxis Data Solutions. It was a predictive analytics and collections management system powered by an AI of staggering complexity. It didn't just track debts. It analyzed behavior. It knew when a debtor was most likely to answer the phone, between 8:03 and 8:30 a.m. on a weekday before the day's fatigue set in. It knew what kind of language would elicit a payment, empathetic but firm for first-time delinquents, direct and consequence-oriented for repeat offenders. It knew precisely when to apply maximum psychological pressure. It cross-referenced social media, public records, and purchasing habits. The Harbinger knew you better than you knew yourself, and it used that knowledge with surgical precision. Marcus was a virtuoso of this machine. At 34, he was Praxis's top performer, a man who saw debt not as a human tragedy, but as an elegant puzzle of assets and liabilities. His job was to solve the puzzle, to rebalance the equation. It was clean. It was logical. It was, in its own way, beautiful. His screen glowed with his target list for the next morning. Account 77B Vance Elias. The Harbinger had flagged it for an 8:15 a.m. call. Probability of contact, 92.7%. Probability of payment commitment, any amount, 64.3%. Probability of full resolution without legal action, 1.8%. A grim but clear statistical picture. The file was a classic tragedy, Marcus mused as he sipped his mineral water. Industrial worker, medical issues overleveraged. The system had even flagged a recent increase in online searches for bankruptcy options and foreclosure timelines. The Vances were at the breaking point, a state the AI designated as prime intervention point. The algorithm suggested a sympathetic but firm approach, followed by the formal notification of the wage garnishment petition being filed on Friday. It was a textbook case. Marcus felt no malice toward Elias Vance. He felt nothing at all. Vance was a series of data points, a name on a screen. Marcus was a functionary of an economic reality as undeniable as gravity. People spent money they didn't have. That money had to be returned. His job was to facilitate that return. Emotion was a variable that only complicated the math. He shut down his system for the night and stood before the window, looking down at the sprawling city. Millions of lights, millions of stories, millions of accounts. Some were current, some were delinquent. All were part of the vast, intricate dance of capital. And he, Marcus Thorne, was one of its most accomplished choreographers. The world made sense to him, a world of numbers, consequences, and predictable patterns. A world where every debt, sooner or later, was paid. The next morning at precisely 8:15 a.m., the Harbinger's automated dialer connected Marcus to Elias Vance's number. Marcus put on his headset, the smooth plastic cool against his skin. He took a sip of coffee and pulled up the account details. Total outstanding balance, 147,382.91. A formidable number, displayed in an aggressive, cautionary red. The phone on the other end rang once, twice, 3 times. Just as voicemail was about to pick up, there was a click. Hello? The voice was strained, tired. Elias Vance, right on schedule. The harbinger was, as always, correct. Good morning, Mr. Vance, Marcus began, his tone a carefully modulated blend of professionalism and empathy, a pitch he could produce in his sleep. This is Marcus Thorne calling from Praxis Data Solutions regarding your consolidated account. I know we had an appointment to speak yesterday, and I was just calling to follow up. There was a long sigh on the other end, a sound heavy with resignation. Look, Mr. Thorne, I've got nothing new to tell you. Nothing has changed. A miracle didn't happen overnight. I understand your situation is difficult. Mr. Vance, and we want to work with you, Marcus said. Reading from a script the harbinger suggested for de-escalation and control. To that end, I just need to verify the total outstanding balance with you before we discuss potential payment options. Can you confirm that you are aware of the current balance on your account? Aware of it? A bitter laugh crackled through the phone. Mister, I see that number in my nightmares. It's burned onto the inside of my eyelids. I understand. For verification purposes, the total as of this morning is $147,382.91. Marcus paused for effect, letting the weight of the number land. Is that the amount you have on record? There was a moment of silence. Then Vance's voice changed. The weariness was gone, replaced by a strange, sharp edge. What did you just say? The balance, Marcus repeated patiently. 147,000? No, Vance interrupted. Say that again. The balance, as of this morning. Marcus frowned. This was an unusual deviation from the predicted conversation flow. Yes, the balance is... Hold on. He looked at his screen. And for the first time in his 7 years at Praxis, Marcus Thorne felt a jolt of genuine confusion. The number was no longer there. Where the bold red 147,382.91 had been just seconds before, there was now a placid, elegant, impossible string of green digits. 000. He blinked. He thought his screen had glitched. He refreshed the page, a flicker of annoyance passing through him. The page reloaded, but the number remained. 0 Urus. Sir, please hold one moment, Marcus said, his voice losing its smooth cadence. He frantically typed on his keyboard, pulling up the raw account ledger. Transaction history, payment records, interest accrual. Everything was there, a perfect history of mounting debt, a story he knew by heart. But the final definitive line item, the one that should have displayed the total, read balance due, 0.20 status, paid in full, a glitch. It had to be a catastrophic system glitch, the kind that heads would roll for, Mr. Vance, Marcus said, trying to regain his composure. It appears we are having a technical issue on our end. The number I have is fluctuating. I will need to call you back. Don't you dare hang up this phone. Elias Vance's voice was low, but it vibrated with an intensity Marcus had never heard before. You tell me. What does my balance say on your screen right now? Marcus swallowed. He looked at the glowing green digits. It felt absurd, like lying to say it out loud. It was a violation of the natural order of things. But it was what the system, his infallible harbinger, was telling him. Sir, Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper. According to my system, your entire balance now reads as 0. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It wasn't the silence of confusion or anger. It was the silence of held breath, of impossible, earth-shattering shock. And then, for the first time, Marcus Thorne heard Elias Vance weep. It wasn't a sound of sadness. It was a raw, broken, cathartic sound. It was the sound of chains breaking, of a drowning man finally reaching the surface, gasping in the clean, sweet air. And Marcus Thorne, the man of numbers and logic, could do nothing but listen, his own world suddenly, terrifyingly, out of balance. The Goliath sat on the corner of the dining room table. It wasn't a monster of flesh and bone, but of paper and ink, a physical manifestation of their anxiety. A teetering stack of envelopes, each stamped with a blood-red past due or a stark, accusatory final notice. Elias Vance had taken to calling it Goliath because every morning he felt like a terrified David, armed with nothing but a lukewarm cup of coffee and a sinking feeling in his gut that tasted like cold dread. The pile seemed to have its own gravity, pulling the light and warmth from the room into its paper heart. He was a good man. He knew this fundamentally, in the way a person knows the sky is blue or that fire is hot. He had worked the same line at the auto plant for 17 years, his hands calloused and scarred from the rhythm of metal on metal. He never missed a day he wasn't sick, never shirked a shift. He loved his wife, Sarah, with a quiet intensity that had only deepened over 2 decades. A love expressed not in grand gestures, but in the way he made her tea just right every morning. He adored his daughter, Lily, a bright-eyed 9-year-old with a galaxy of freckles across her nose, who still believed her dad could fix anything from a broken toy to a scraped knee, but he couldn't fix Goliath. He couldn't even make a dent in its paper armor. The trouble had started small, a whisper of a problem that they were sure they could manage. Sarah's diagnosis, a chronic autoimmune disorder with a name full of harsh syllables that felt alien in their simple life. It was a thief, stealing her energy, her comfort, and most relentlessly, their money. Then came the layoffs at the plant. Elias, with 17 years of seniority, was safe from the chopping block. But his overtime hours, the lifeblood that paid for Sarah's co-pays and prescriptions, vanished overnight. They had dipped into their savings, watching the number they'd built with years of careful sacrifice dwindle to nothing. Then their retirement, a fund meant for a future of peaceful fishing trips and garden projects, was drained. Finally, they entered the treacherous, glittering world of credit cards. Each swipe was a promise, a desperate whisper of, "We'll catch up next month." But next month never came. It was always just out of reach, a shimmering mirage in a desert of debt. Now Goliath was a monument to their failure, a tombstone for their dreams. The mortgage was 3 months behind, each day bringing them closer to a notice on their door that would shatter their world. The car, a rattling 10-year-old sedan, was 1 payment away from being repossessed. And the medical bills, those were the true giant, a beast with endless ravenous appetites, each new statement another head on the hydra. This morning, a new envelope sat pristine atop the pile. It was from Praxis Data Solutions, a name that sounded harmlessly corporate but was, in reality, the central nervous system of the collection agencies. They owned his debt now, all of it. They had bought it for pennies on the dollar, and their business was to squeeze every last cent out of him with cold, algorithmic efficiency. His phone buzzed on the table, a frantic, angry sound. He didn't need to look. He knew the number, had it memorized against his will. It was Marcus Thorne, his account manager at Praxis. Thorne had a voice as smooth and cold as polished granite. He never yelled. He didn't need to. His calm, practiced diction, outlining the inevitable consequences, foreclosure, wage garnishment, asset seizure, was far more terrifying than any shouted threat. He spoke of ruin with the placid disinterest of a weatherman predicting rain. "You're not going to answer it?" Sarah's voice was soft from the doorway. She was wrapped in a thick robe, her face pale, but her eyes, the same warm brown that had captivated him at a high school football game, were steady. She carried her illness with a quiet grace that broke his heart. Elias shook his head, pushing his phone away as if it were venomous. "It's just Thorne. He can talk to my voicemail. Tell it all our problems. Maybe we should just talk to him, Eli. Explain again. Maybe this time." "Explain what?" "That your medicine cost more than our groceries. That my hours were cut." "He doesn't care, Sarah. To him, we're not people. We're a number on a spreadsheet. A delinquent account. A problem to be solved, and the solution is to squeeze." He stood up, unable to sit still, a caged animal in his own home. He walked to the window overlooking their small, neat lawn, the grass still damp with morning dew. It was a good neighborhood, the kind of place where people waved to each other and kids left their bikes on the grass. The kind of place they had worked their whole lives to afford. The kind of place they were about to lose. Lily's laughter drifted in from the backyard where she was playing with their scruffy terrier Buster. It was a sound of pure, untainted joy, a sound that felt like a judgment. How could he protect that joy when Goliath was sitting at their table, ready to devour their lives? He felt a familiar pressure in his chest, the tightening grip of a panic he had learned to live with. He was drowning. Every day the water rose another inch. He was strong, he had always been strong, but he was so tired of treading water. That night, after Sarah and Lily were asleep, Elias found himself back at the dining room table. The house was silent save for the hum of the refrigerator. The moonlight streamed through the window, casting a silver, ghostly light on Goliath's paper shoulders, making the red ink of the notices look like fresh blood. He hadn't prayed in years, not really. He went to church on Christmas and Easter, held Sarah's hand and mumbled along with the hymns, but the connection felt distant, a forgotten language. But tonight despair was a universal translator. He didn't kneel. He just sat there, his calloused hands resting on the worn wood of the table, and closed his eyes, the exhaustion pressing down on him like a physical weight. He didn't speak the words aloud. He let them form in the desperate silence of his heart, a raw and unadorned plea. "God," he began, the name feeling foreign and familiar all at once. "If you're there, if you can hear me, I'm lost. I've done everything I was supposed to do. I've worked hard. I've tried to be a good husband, a good father. And I'm failing. I'm failing them. This weight, it's crushing me. I'm not asking for a miracle. I'm not asking for riches. I'm just asking for a way out, a path, a little bit of air. Please, I'm drowning. Please just help me breathe." He opened his eyes. Nothing had changed. The monstrous pile of bills still sat there, unmoved, a silent testament to his struggle. The weight in his chest was just as heavy. With a sigh that seemed to drain the last of his strength, he stood up and went to bed, the silence of the house offering no reply.